Yo.
Pretty good.
Made it to work yesterday.
Sprinted all the way from the other side of campus.
Are you like part-time or
Hours. But I don't know if it's that hours, it's just whatever I got learned. So,
he always wanted to be interesting, but I don't as bad. Taking project now. Right at the end of the
yeah, I have to mind.
I Just like you don't have to have their own thing. Stuff. Oh, shit. Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. All right, try again. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Oh, now, can you hear me now? Hello, hello, testing, testing. Oh, perfect. Is it clear? I'm using Bluetooth. That's it. I'm just wondering if you're ready. Hunter, can you hear me? Jack? Can you hear me? Oh, feedback's weird. All right, let's get started. Okay, let's see. All right. Welcome everybody. It would help if I plug this in, right? Yeah, maybe if I turn this off here. There we go. Okay. To show me, not Hunter. All right. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Let's see where we are. Let's take a look at the syllabus. I always like to come back to the syllabus just to give me an idea of where we've been and where we're going. Let's see. All right. So last Tuesday we just introduced a course. We started setting up the development environment. We set up a Node.js. We created a React application, and we committed our source code to GitHub, right? And this is all explained in the first assignment. And you have till the 22nd, I believe, to complete, try to reproduce exactly what we're doing here in today's class between Tuesday and today. So the only step that's left is to deploy our source code to Netlify, right? So when we run our environment in our local host, right? We can do development, we can change and whatnot, but we're the only ones who can access that server, right? No one else can. Right? So what we need to do is to replicate that environment, but in a remote server, which is publicly available throughout the world, right? So that we can then give out our URL to our application that is running on the web, and then everybody can come and see all the great things that we're working on, right? So that's going to be the setup for the next couple of weeks, right? We're going to do all local development on our local host servers, right? Where we can do a lot of quick prototyping, debugging. It's done everything locally on your machine, on your setup, and then when you're satisfied, right, you then deploy it to a remote server for everybody else to see, right? And so every week, starting from the 22nd, you will be deploying a new version of your application throughout the next 14 weeks or so, right? And you'll be deploying to separate branches, right? So so that each branch will host a different version of your application for the first assignment, second assignment, third, and so on and so forth, right? The TA is always going to be about a week behind you, right? So that once you're working on assignment 3, they'll be grading assignment 2, right? So that you'll just be 1 week ahead of them, right? They'll be giving you feedback on whatever else you worked on previously. So yeah, so today we're gonna finish that up, the first assignment, and then you're welcome to start trying to replicate it on your own. I think the instructions are fairly clear. We'll deploy it to Netlify, and we'll get started already on the second assignment, HTML, because next Monday it's Martin Luther King and we're not meeting. So I'm just trying to rush a little bit ahead to start some material that we were going to start on Monday. Yes.
Do you mind if there's other stuff that
Oh no, absolutely. Just I was only pointing out that it's important not to deploy, to put something in GitHub that should not be there, or that you consider not to be there. At least Node.js, Node underscore modules should not be there. Anything that has to do with your IDE should not be there. But anything else that is configuration files or XML files or things like that, or compiled, any jar files, zip files should not go there. But yeah, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, so that's the plan. I'm trying to set up here a recording setup where it would record me walking around. Although I don't know why it's recording some other student instead of me. All right, so I'll debug this later. Video participant. Okay, well. But yeah, so also, I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at the recording from from Monday. I did notice that every time I walked away from the podium, the audio was dropped, the quality of the audio dropped. So let's see if this helps a little bit on the recording quality. All right. Any questions? All right. Let's see. Right. So we had created this project. Let's open it up. I believe it was this one. It was Twitter React app for this semester. And we had, once you open it up from the terminal, you can start it by saying npm start. So yeah, so we created this using npx create React app, and then we gave it the name of the project. You could have called it whatever we want. And it creates a boilerplate, hello world, the minimum usable React.js application, and here it is. So let's focus on now making this available online, right? So that other folks can see it, in particular the TAs, myself, but potentially, just whenever you'll go out for a job interview, hopefully you'll feel proud of what you're working on and you want to show this off, part of your portfolio. Okay. So we did push this out to GitHub, and I suggested that you make this put this in a public repository. Let me sign out of here. Let me sign in to my GitHub repository. There we go. You're going to send me a text. 1, 2, 7, 103. And once we're there for spring 23, this is the repository that we created right before we left on Monday, right? This just replicates the entire source code that we have locally on our machine, except whatever we set to ignore. Right? So for instance, here you would not see node_modules, right? So we definitely do not want to see node_modules on your directory in your Git repository whenever you submit this to the TAs, right? Please do not have that here, and we did that by adding that ignore here in the git ignore. Okay? We're saying that ignore that particular directory, and it's not there. Perfect. So to make this available, you can go to Netlify. Netlify. I mean, there's tons of free host alternatives. Netlify is one of the most trivial ones to deploy something. Right? You just give it you could just point it to a GitHub repository. It will clone down your repository, and it'll try to figure out what it is that you're trying to do, and identify whether this is Vue.js, this is React.js, what is it? It's Angular, what is it? And it will create the environment for you to deploy it. So it's pretty smart. So if you don't have an account, please go ahead and go and create an account, and then you can and then we can say add a new site, import from an existing project, and you can point it to either GitLab or Bitbucket or Azure, or we have GitHub. It's going to ask us to authenticate with GitHub, and I had already authenticated. And we can search for the repository that we just created, right, which is SP23. There was 2, maybe. Hello? Yes, no? Okay, there it is. So it's this one right here. And it'll ask you a couple of things. So this is how it's going to build everything. So this is what we would do locally to compile everything and link together if we would be using somebody else's project, right? We would do an npm build install and we would have a working version of someone else's project, right? So that's what they're doing, right? They're cloning down our project from GitHub, and then they're running npm builds and trying to figure out the environment that we need. So we're going to say deploy site. So it's going to take a little bit. We can see the behind the scenes of what's going on if we go into the products deploy, and we can see the console of the remote machine, right, as it clones down the repository, runs the build scripts, right, and installs Node.js and installs all the libraries. And if there are any errors, it would display them here. Anything that it would complain about, it would make it available here. So it looks like it was successful. So it's finishing up the build request. So what it'll do is it'll come up with a random name for your application, right? If you want an actual name, you'll have to pay. Right? You have to buy a domain and associate it with your repository. We're not going to do that. If you want to, go ahead, but you don't have to. You just can keep the random name that they give you, and that's going to be plenty, right? Finishing up, I think it's completed. So yeah, so it came up with this name, delightful Stroop Waffle something, whatever. Okay. And if we open it up, we go there. It provides a URL. This is the URL where your application is deployed, right? And it gives you a thumbnail of what it would look like if you navigate there. So you navigate there. And this hopefully should be identical to what we have running locally on our machine. Okay. So we're going to refer to this as the kind of like the production environment, right? Production meaning facing outwards, right, to the final customer, client, or whoever it is that you're building this for. Okay. In this case, myself and the TAs are your clients, your customers, right? But certainly you can you can just copy that link and send it to anybody. Send it to your mom or dad or whatever. Say, look what we're doing, right? So this is all the cool things that we're building this semester. Okay. So yeah, so this hopefully looks identical to the local version. So this is the remote, and the local one is this one. This is it's not a coincidence that these look identical, right? Now for the deliverable for this first assignment is for you to give us that URL, right? That's one of the deliverables. Copy that URL, and you're going to paste it in the assignment one when you submit it, right? As well as the Git repository. So the Git repository where the actual source code is. So this one, right? So that URL right there, right? Copy that URL, and that's also a segment deliverable, right? So those two things: the source code, so that TAs can go in and and just confirm that is indeed what's out there, and also the application actually running on a remote server. Everybody good? All right. So that's the first assignment. Just set it up and get it up and running. Awesome. Okay. So let's focus on what's coming up, right? So yeah, so we work through this, deploying to Netlify, committing to GitHub, creating our first React application, installing it. Okay, so we worked through that. I'm just gonna go. I just want to look at the assignment one last time to see that I didn't miss anything. Okay, so we have an integrated development environment. I'm using IntelliJ, but Visual Studio Code is also a very popular alternative. And the first 7 weeks, we're going to be spending it on this part, on creating the client, right, the front end of our application. We installed the Node.js server. We implemented the React application, right, and we deployed it. We ran it locally. We compiled it, ran it. We posted it to GitHub, and we then deployed it to Netlify. Okay, so the deliverables are those two things, right? The URL to GitHub and the URL to the application running on Netlify. Okay, all right. Hopefully, I see that some of you have already submitted the assignments. Great. I hope that about 80, maybe 90% of you will be done maybe by this weekend. But just in case, there's always a few that might struggle because different operating systems, different the Netlify changes a few times a year, so the instructions might not be exactly what they used to be in the previous semester. So we might run to some edge cases. So I just want to give ourselves a buffer time to iron those things out at the beginning, right? Okay. All right. Yeah. So let's continue. So HTML. Right. So HTML. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language, right? And it's a offshoot of XML, right? Extensible markup language. So XML is just a syntax, right, of a whole bunch of pointy brackets everywhere, right, and attributes and values instead of tags and whatnot. But not until you choose a particular use case is XML any use, right? So HTML is one particular use of XML, right? There's an infinite number of uses for XML in computer graphics and mathematics and any number of formatting data and user interfaces. HTML just happens to be one particular use of XML. Okay, and it's widely used to tell the browser how to render things. Okay, and so for instance, this particular web page, right? It's Canvas is rendered using HTML. Okay? So let's take a look at what is the HTML that is used for rendering this. So if you right click on the any background of any browser, most modern browsers, you'll have an option to inspect the page. Right? Right? If you click on that, it brings up a tool that I kind of want to refer to it kind of like it's kind of like Neo, right? Looking behind the matrix, right? And so this is what Neo sees, right? Everything in green and how reality is, right? And this is what everyone else sees, right? This is what how pretty the world is, and with all these colors and whatnot, right? It's very, very pretty. But in reality, this is what's happening, right? This is a piece of text, right? An ASCII document that was downloaded from the web, from some server, right? Telling the browser how to render everything. Okay? And if you see this, it's a whole bunch of pointy brackets everywhere, right? These are all HTML tags, right? So let's spend some time just exploring this. Okay. Okay. So let's see what can we expect here. So notice that at the beginning of this document, you always have this bang doc type HTML, right? So this tells the browser that presumably this is an HTML document. It should be interpreted as HTML. Again, there's an infinite number of applications for pointy brackets and attributes and whatnot, right? So this happens to be just one of the millions of things that you could do with XML. So we're telling the browser you should interpret this as HTML, not any of the other millions of things that you could do with XML. This is specifically HTML. So it's a particular set of tags. These tags are expected to have a particular names. HTML is one of them. Head, body, script, right? Div, no script. Those names for those tags only make sense within the context of HTML. Right? And browsers know what to do with them, how to interpret them. Right? For instance, one of the things that the browser expects, right, is that this has a specific structure, right? That it has a root HTML, right? See over there this is the root of the document, and XML in general, not HTML only, but XML in general follows all this syntax, right? There's a root tag that holds all of the other tags in the body of that root tag. Yes, and the tags, as they nest inside of each other, right, creates a hierarchical data structure, right, where you have a root, right, and then you have a whole bunch of branches and nodes and branches and nodes and branches. So every time you see a particular tag, it's a node in some tree-like structure, right? And if that tag contains other tags, then it should be thought of as a node that has several branches that contains other nodes, right? Some of these nodes are leaves, right, that don't have any more children, right? And those leaves is what eventually gets rendered. It actually gets rendered, right? Everything that contains is more for structure and layout, right? Saying how things should be to the left of each other and what are the relationships between the tags. But the nodes are the ones who actually render things, right? So all HTML documents follow this idea, right? This is a hierarchical structure with the root being the HTML tag. Notice that as I hover my mouse on the right-hand side, things are highlighted on the left side, right? So browsers is telling you that, hey, that particular node refers to this thing on the left side, right? Whatever you're hovering on the right is highlighted on the left side, okay? Meaning I am using that node to render this thing that I'm highlighting, okay? There it is. So all HTML documents have a root HTML tag, and the children, right? The two nodes that got off from the root are these two other tags or these two other nodes, right? These nodes often are referred to as elements, right? And notice that they actually are rendered under the tag elements. See that? Okay, meaning these are all the elements that I am rendering. And what the browser does is that it parses the left side to render the right-hand side to render the left-hand side. Now, this right-hand side can be either static, right? There could be an actual file an actual ASCII file that contains all that content on the right-hand side, okay? And then the browser just renders it, or right? This right-hand side can be dynamically generated, right? In different places. It could be either dynamically generated on the server, right? Where you run, for loops and if statements and a whole bunch of logic, right? And you build this ASCII file on the fly, yeah, running your logic. Or it can be also dynamically rendered once it gets to the browser, runs some JavaScript on the browser, and it can dynamically manipulate this data structure, all right? So this class, this whole semester, we're going to be spending it on that second alternative, right? We're going to be using JavaScript running on the browser to dynamically manipulate this data structure, right? All web development is how do we manipulate this data structure most effectively, right? Most easily. How can we dynamically manipulate this data structure so that we can render whatever we want on the left side? Yes? Right? And that's what React.js makes it so easy to do, right? There's plenty of ways of doing it. There's very hard ways of doing it, and there's very easy ways of doing it. React.js is on the easy side, right? The more functional, more modular, more reusable, that we can implement lots and lots of the great software engineering techniques that we've been learning throughout, our stay here at the university. Yes. Anyway, so we have these two tags, the head and the body. Notice that if I hover over the head, it doesn't render anything, right? It doesn't highlight anything on the left side. See that? Whereas if I select the body, it highlights the whole thing, right? And indeed, the head is not meant to render anything, right? The head is for where you have some meta information, right? Maybe who the author is, when was this published, okay? Whether I depend on other things or the documents, right? I depend on some other CSS files, other images or JavaScript files, right? This is where meta, where a head, also downloads a whole bunch of other stuff. So for instance, it's saying here that this document, to render, it also needs to go off and download these fonts, right? It should go off and download all these fonts, right? Also download this CSS file, okay? So when an HTML document gets downloaded to the browser, it starts parsing it, and it realizes that the document, it's actually referencing a whole bunch of other documents, right? So what it does is that the browser will actually send many requests out to the server, right, for any one document, right? Because the document might reference many other documents, images, movies, CSS files, JavaScript files. So one document might send 20, 30 different requests to the server. And maybe not only that server, it might go out to several servers, okay? Most of them coming from where, the mothership where it came from, but it might be referencing, some generic JavaScript file from some library like jQuery or whatever, right? It might go actually to the jQuery library and bring it down, right? Or might go out to the Bootstrap library and bring it down, right? So it's hitting all these servers, right, to then render your content on the left side. Make sense? Okay. Anyway, more on this later. So the body, if I hover over the body, okay, this data structure, as I said earlier, right, can be manipulated. Right? It can be manipulated programmatically with JavaScript or with Java, C#, whatnot on the server, or manually by using this tool, right? So for instance, if I say delete, the body's gone. The body is gone. Says, oh my goodness, I just blew up Canvas, right? Right. The Canvas application is broken. But not to fret. If I refresh, right, the whole thing will be reloaded. Okay. There's nothing that I can permanently break, right, by editing this document, right? This is a copy of whatever is on the server, right? This is a cache of whatever the server has. Okay. And I can now manipulate it and play around with it. Okay, so let's just take a look at this. So the body has notice that has that's the name of this tag of this element, and then you have these attributes, class. See that, class and a value. So these are called attributes or HTML attributes, and there's tons of them, right? Some of them are applicable to all elements, right? Class, ID, they're applicable, most elements. Some attributes are very specific to a specific element that only makes sense to a specific element, right? Maybe like, value, maybe it's like for an input field, okay? So it might make no sense to use the attribute value on body, right? So some attributes are useful and meaningful for all elements. Some of them are very specific. So what, for instance, and what they're used for, these attributes are used to configure the behavior of that element. So the element is called body, right? And its intent is to collect all the things that are going to be rendered on the screen, right? And then the attribute class configures how it should behave. In particular, class says how this should look, right? What colors it should use, right? What style should I follow? And it's referencing all these classes, with left side, course menu expanded, full width, context, course, blah, 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 all those things. Yes? We'll learn about that next week, right? Classes are references to style things, right? That say what font you should use, what background colors, foreground colors, borders, padding, margins, and whatnot. So we'll spend all next week, we'll do that. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's see if I keep moving. We have iframe, form. That's where it ends. Okay. Now, if I want to see specifically something, I'm wondering, for instance, this quizzes, how is this rendered? You can right-click on that specific UI element, right? And you say inspect, and it'll highlight it on the right-hand side. Right? It'll say, okay, well, I'm gonna, look up in this data structure where is the specific set of elements that are rendering what you just highlighted. Okay. So, for instance, if I hover over this anchor, see that anchor A stands for hyperlink, right? Something that I should be able to click and then navigate somewhere else, right? It references some other document, right? That's anchor. And href, for instance, configures where should it go, right? If you click this text, what text? The text that is the body. See this text over here? That is inside of an opening anchor and a closing anchor. See that? Right? It has the opening tag here, where that starts here and it ends here, right? And then the text, and then the closing tag. See that? So quizzes, the text is inside the body of the anchor tag. Right? We say that just like body contains a whole bunch of elements, and then other elements contain other elements. Well, some elements just contain text. Right? So, for instance, that the text here you see quizzes. Right? If I click over, you can actually render this. Say los quizzes. Right? And notice the text actually changes immediately on the UI. See that? Right? Now we did that manually. So the whole point of what we're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks is learn how to do this programmatically, right? Using functions and classes and components, right? And how they can work together to build things like this. So because one might say, well, somebody look at all that text, all these LIs, right? LIs stands for line items, right? So for instance, and ULs, for instance, UL over here, stands for unordered list. So this list on the left-hand side, notice if I hover over it, it's highlighting that left side. See that? And then each individual line item, right, is highlighted. It's highlighted as I select the line item on the right, it highlights on the left. See that? Right. So our intention is asking ourselves, did actually somebody write this, one by one? Probably not. Right. Probably there's some function that has some kind of array, right, of what section should be displayed, right? Maybe following some kind of settings of what the faculty decided that those should be available, right? That there should be a Piazza link, there should be Zoom meetings, but there shouldn't be a whole bunch of other things, right? So programmatically, that algorithm decided that these are it. It's iterating through that loop, running some logic and just rendering it this way. Make sense? All right. So that's what we're going to be learning this semester. Okay. So yeah, so I can, I can remove these, right? And they're removed immediately on the left side. Okay. All right. So this data structure on the right-hand side has a specific name, right? It's referred to as the DOM, D-O-M, right? I'm big on acronyms, so I'll be using lots and lots of acronyms. And the quizzes will ask you, what is this acronym? One of the questions might say, what does DOM stand for, right? And you'll answer correctly, document object model, right? And so it's a what does HTML stand for, right? What does HTTP stand for? What does CSS stand for, right? So those are some kind of like really basic stuff that you want to get right, right? Coming out of a web dev course, right? So yeah, so that's where we're going to be spending this today and next Thursday. We're going to be spending all on HTML and attributes and all the most common types of elements that we're going to be using throughout the semester. Okay. All right. Okay, so that's the DOM, right? That's the DOM. Also notice that as I select this, notice that below, look what's happening down below. Down below says that this line item over here, right, has all these curly bracket thingies on the bottom. What is this? If you see, you'll see that these are this is somehow referring to this line item. It's referring to this line item, and it's telling it that the padding should be 0. See that? Okay. So this is one language, the HTML language, right? That specifies what the content is, what the relationship of the content with other content, right? The logical relationship and the structure of the document, right? And some really basic styling, right? Of what fonts to use and what colors and whatnot. Very basic, right? This down below, we are overriding those default stylings, right? If we didn't have any of this styling here down below, this would look very lame, right? It would not look as professional as it looks right now, right? It would be all in Times New Roman and just black and white, okay? And very very top down, just everything to the left hand side, right? And very uninteresting, right? For instance, the fact that we have this column on the left side, then we have another column in the middle here, and this big main content. Plus, I think we might have, yeah, this is actually split into 4 different columns, right? So this kind of like navigation, that allows you to go to different places in Canvas. This is to be able to navigate within our particular course, right? This is kind of like the main content that allows you to just consume the course in a sequential, and then on the right hand side, some calendars and some other satellite information. Right. So the fact that this even has 4 columns, right, already tells you that somebody overrode the default layout, right? That's not supported, out of the box. Well, unless you use tables, but that's a no-no. So yeah, so that's what we're going to be learning. First, this week we'll learn how to do some really basic, creating some basic content, right, with headings, paragraphs, lists, tables, some of the most basic stuff. Get us up to speed with that, and then the week after that, we'll come back and style it so that it looks a little more presentable. Changing borders, putting some fonts, some images, changing the foreground colors, the colors between the items, right, and whatnot. Okay, right, so that's the plan for the next. So let me show you. So inspect, right? So that's the content here. That's the div. Looks like that's the main div right there. So notice that it highlights this bluish and this greenish section. See that, right? And the main content is inside the blue, and then there's kind of like this green that goes around. Now these colors that you see there are documented down below. Those colors refer to these things. Okay, the blue refers to the main content. Okay, when the actual text that gets rendered, right? It's telling you that that particular content is a particular size. The green over there, right, it looks like it's spacing, white spacing all around, but there's no actual content in there. It's all white, right? It's all background. It is referred to as the padding. How much space you have above and below, right? 12 pixels and above and below. 10 pixels on the left and 6 pixels on the right. Okay. And there's borders and there's margins, right? And there's the position, right? Together, these attributes, right, specify what is referred to as the box model, right? The box model. So any piece of content that you see here, right? That little green check mark, the text here, this box, the box around the box, or the box around the box around the box, right? It's all boxes, right? So the browser is trying to figure out where all these boxes go. Okay, and some boxes push off other boxes. Some boxes want to be vertically stacked, and some boxes want to be horizontally stacked. Right? Some content just wants to push things off to the right. To the right. Okay, until there's no more space. Right, and when it reaches the end, it kind of like wraps around. And so it wants to render from left to right, from top to bottom. Okay, in European countries. In some other countries, like Hebrew or Islamic countries, right? It might maybe render backwards, right? Or in Japanese and Chinese might want to render from top to bottom, right? So depending on on the region and locality, right? The browser knows how to render all these different ways of rendering it. Okay, from left to right, from right to left, right, from top to bottom, from bottom to up, and you can configure all those things. So you can create all your content, right, and make it available in all different types of cultures and languages and whatnot, right? Okay. So yeah, so this padding is says that there's 12, and you can play around with this. There's 12 here. You can increase it and just create and see what it would look like, right, if it had much more padding. There's no border, but we can change that. We can change and give it border. We can say that. So this element.style shows anything that I have overwritten here using this tool. Right. Everything else down below, right? These are rules that has downloaded from the server, right? Style sheet that has downloaded from the server and has applied to the document. Although I can override all these things. For instance, I could say that I want a border. Right? I want a border that is 10 pixels wide. I want it to be red, and I want it to be solid. And oops, did I do it? Oops, what did I do? Border, 12 pixels, solid, red. Huh? Element style. What am I styling here? Am I being overwritten? Which element am I doing here? Border. Oh, okay. So it has a background color. Already has border. And for instance, the background is telling it to be red, white, and we can change it to different backgrounds. Right. This red. So they all change to red, and change the foreground, the color, to be white. And change the border. I could change how it is the distance between the elements, right? The spacing and whatnot. So that's going to be focus of CSS the week after that, right? So next week we'll finish up HTML, and then the week after that we'll spend a week talking about CSS. All right. Okay. So let's talk about HTML. let's see. Oh, also, let's see. I did copy all the office hours of the different TAs that are available throughout the week. I'm trying to convince a couple more TAs for more coverage on Sunday. Since the assignments will be due on Sunday, it'd be nice to have a few folks, to that you can, have you help over the weekend. But yeah, so all the TA office hours are available here. You should be able to click these links and join their Zoom meeting. Okay. And that's me, my office hours, which was last Tuesday, yesterday, Wednesday, and then tomorrow on Fridays. Even though I split them up by section, you're free to come to them anyway. I will have to give those folks priority. Right? So the tomorrow's is CS 5610, section 7. But you're free to come and listen in, or I'm sure towards the end I can help out if you need help. All right, so let's take a look at week 2. So HTML. Let's talk about HTML. Right, so HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, right? And it's intended to tell the browser what to do with the text, right? If you just have text and you don't have any tags, so if you have if you don't even have HTML or head or body and you just have plain text, okay, just plain text, and yes. Oh, it's not available. Oops. Why is it not available? Oh, lock. There we go. All right, you see now? Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so if you just you can start off with an HTML document, right, and just put a whole bunch of text in there, right? And even though you might put a whole bunch of paragraphs and headings and whatnot, just plain all ASCII, the browser would ignore any formatting that you thought you're giving it. Right? So if you want something to actually render as a heading or as a paragraph or something to have a particular structure, you have to explicitly tell the browser that you want a specific format. Okay, like for instance, this piece of text, if you want it bold, you have to surround it with the B element. Okay, and now you'll hear me say use a different terminology for this. Sometimes I'll say tag. Sometimes I'll say element. Okay, and element is a more generic term, right? Whereas tag is a specific syntax of how to define an element using ASCII, right? Using just plain old text. Right? The fact that we're using these pointy brackets and that specific B, right? That's so sometimes I'll refer to it as a tag, but generically it's an element, right? Perhaps as part of some node in some data structure where pointy brackets are irrelevant, right? It's that they form some hierarchical structure, right? And we only have pointy brackets just for our human way of being able to read this on the screen. Okay. So yeah, those terms are somewhat interchangeable. So yeah, so an HTML document only is just ever going to contain just plain text, right? And some of that text, I would say most of it is just plain text, right? But a lot of it is also you telling the browser how that text should render. Some things are headings, some things are paragraphs, lists, and whatnot. Okay, so here's an example of creating hello.html that just contains hello world, and it is the most trivial HTML documents. You have the root HTML, right? And then you have the head, and then you have the body. The head, as I mentioned earlier, allows you to specify some dependencies between this document and other documents. It also configures, incidentally, the title. See this title over here? This title configures the text you see in the tab. See that tab? Right, or the name of the window, right, or the tab is configured by that title. So this is the only thing, right, that of text content that the head actually you can visually see. Everything else is referencing other documents that might specify that certain things should be red and some things should be blue, right? Other things that what you'll find in here is comments, right? Comments are using the syntax pointed bracket, bang, dash, dash, and then you close it with a dash, dash. This is mostly for us, right? So for comments that we might give ourselves, like as source code, us as developers, just so that we remember next week what is that we were thinking of last week, right? So you use either a single line or multiple lines, right, of comments. So in the body, right, we specify the actual content, hello that world, or yeah, and then in the link you can specify references to files that might live locally, right, in the same directory structure as this one document. So for instance, here link href is referencing a file called style.css that is in the same directory as this one file, right? Whereas this one is referring to some document style.css that is not in this directory. It's actually somewhere else, right, on the web, maybe somewhere half away across the world in Europe, right, in some machine computer who's named this way, or maybe the IP address, and that contains a file .css. So the browser can actually, go and fetch lots of files, right, everywhere else, right, throughout the world, right, to then come and render your one single page. Okay. Yeah, so it's an example of HTML document and the head tag. White spaces are ignored, right? So if you go ahead and create a whole bunch of paragraphs and some text over there that looks like it has a heading, right? All that is going to be ignored, right? Everything's just going to render from left to right, from top to bottom, like a run-on sentence, right? So all the white space is ignored, right? Except the white spaces that are used to separate words, right? So all any tabs, any new lines are collapsed into just a single white space, right? So all this white space would just render also just following here, right, going along. If you want that formatting, you have to explicitly tell it, say, hey, no, I want my white spaces. So you do that by explicitly saying that this should be rendered as a paragraph. And you surround it with P's, right? Opening P and then a closing P. Okay. Now, some of the simplest of elements are headings. Headings allow you to break up your document into multiple sections, right? Usually you have a top level heading 1, with big bold letters, right? And then each section you might have, H2, lots of H2s, right? And then might have some sections, and then you might have some subsections within those sections, right? So you might make those titles even smaller, right? So H1 is the biggest, then H2, then H3, all the way down to H6. H6 is the smallest heading. So yeah, so you might break up your content into multiple headings like this, HTML, and then if you're learning about HTML, you might have sections that talk about the paragraph, sections that talk about headings, lines, unordered lists, and tables and whatnot. Okay. All right, so the DOM, as I mentioned, right, it's a tree-like structure that starts off with the root being the window. So the window, the document that you render, right, is itself a node. Okay, that contains a document, and then the document itself then contains everything else, right? So the document might have references to headings and text and hrefs and links and whatnot. Okay. So this the example of this body over here, All right, so let's take a look at some other elements. So you have lists that can be either ordered or unordered. So for instance, you have UL here that might contain several line items, right? That render courses that I teach in different semesters. So OL is ordered, right? And the default styling here is that everything is it's a Times New Roman, right? Very, very boring. This is the ordered that has 1, 2, 3, 4. You can configure whether you want this to be Roman numerals, you want it to be letters, capitalized, lowercase, different ways of numbering them. Also in the unordered, you can specify what the bullet that you want, but these are all the default styling. So here's just a couple of other examples of ordered lists, unordered lists. Tables is also a common way of styling content. These are mostly intended to be to display tabular data. Tabular data, as in as if they were records in a database, right? Where each row represents some kind of data point, right? It might be all the grades that you got for this semester and then each row would be different students. Yes. So student 1, student 2, student 3, and then across all the grades for student 1, and then the next one would be all the grades for student 2, and then so on and so forth. Make sense? Right. But the intention is that each row, all the rows have the same structure, right? And that all the columns have the same data types. Yes. So column 1 shows all the grades for assignment 1, and then column 2 all the grades for assignment 2. Make sense? Right. That's the intention. They have been misused quite a bit, so that folks don't actually use it for tabular content. And early on, when in the early 90s, when this started to blow up, and folks were starting to use it for creating magazines and blog posts and articles and for news and whatnot. There was no easy way for in HTML to render things in columns, right? And oftentimes, if you read a magazine or a newspaper, usually when they print them, they're usually printed in columns, right? In newspapers, usually they split it up into like 12 columns. In magazines, they might use maybe 2, 3 columns. Yes, it's just to make it easier to read, long form text, right? Instead of having you parse content, really, really long lines, right? They rather have them, thinner columns. Yes. So there is no native support for this in HTML, right? And so for the longest time, what developers would do is that they would use HTML tables for this, right? Because in tables you can create rows and columns, right? And says, "Oh, I can easily split it up into multiple columns," right? So they were misusing HTML tables for the wrong purpose, for the purpose they were not intended. But hey, it was the Wild West at the at the very, very beginning. I will demand, just for practice, that in this class you only use tables for their intended purpose. Okay. Well, let's say that you should make an effort only to use tables for their intended if you use them for layout. Sometimes it's just the easiest thing. It's just to use a table to lay out things in columns, right? But we're going to learn how to do that properly using CSS, right? And using Flex and using grids and so on and so forth. All right. And so we'll learn the correct way of doing it. But again, sometimes tables just too trivial. Anyway, so tables have you declare tables just by saying table, and the tables have actually 3. Yeah, T head, T body, and T foot. Okay. T head is meant for the headings of a table, right? Where you say, well, these are the headings, assignment 1, assignment 2, assignment 3, blah, 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 right? And then down below is the actual data, right? What you actually got for assignment 1, what you actually got for assignment 2. But the titles, describe what each column is. So that goes in T head, and T body is where you have the main content. And T foot is where you would put, maybe totals, if you're like adding or averages, right, or things like that, where you have some accumulative values of tables. These were very, very popular, obviously, in research for research folks, right, where they were displaying lots of data, right, to their research buddies, right, of from some experiments, right? So they wanted to be able to display lots of tabular data. Anyway, so here's a couple examples. We have table. There's a T head, and then each T there's only one T head, and this T head has one table row, TR. So that TR, that means table row. One table row, and then TH or TD displays the heading. So TH is for T head or table head or table heading, right? So username, password, first name, last name, right? So these are all headings of my table, right? And because it's headings, these are bolded, right? These are nice and bold. Whereas the actual data can be rendered in the T body with a TR for row, so one row, and then you have Alice, password, blah blah blah, Wonderland, student, yada yada yada. Notice that I have some tabs, right? I have some new lines. I have some tabbing at the beginning. All that is being ignored by the browser, right? The browser is ignoring all those tabs. Okay, all those tabs are really for myself. It makes it easier for me to read, right? Adding all those tabs, all those new lines, it just makes it more pleasant for me to parse the content. But the browser couldn't care less, right? What the browser really cares is about these tags, right? That's what it's telling it to render it as a row, and then each one as a column within that row. Make sense? Right? So the example here is only showing one row, right? But down below, I'm showing two rows, right? Really, there would be two of these TRs, right? One TR and then another TR, right? One table row, two table rows, one for Alice and one for Bob. Okay, right? Other things is something that we will be spending lots of time with are form elements, right? Up to this point, all this is text for us to read, right? That we want to consume. But we should also be able to generate data, right? Or input data. And for that, we have form elements, of which the simplest of form elements is the input field, right? The text input field, right? Where it's a single line, and you can just type any piece of text in there, right? Unrestricted text, whatever you want, okay? And the way you do that is by using the input tag, right? Input, right? Now, this is one of the first elements that is a self-closing element. See that? All the other ones up to this point were elements that contain other elements that contain other elements that contain some text. Yes? The input field does not contain anything, right? It's just all by itself. Okay? So we call this a self-closing tag. Right? It just closes itself. It's both an opening and a closing tag. Okay? And the slash goes at the end, right? As opposed to this label, right, has a opening tag and then it has a closing tag. See that? Right? And then it contains this in the body. In the body of this element or this tag, you have first name. Okay? Whereas input has no body, right? It's all by itself, lonesome. Okay? Let's see what else. Also, we start seeing some uses of what we call attributes, ID, value. Those are attributes, right? And those are used for configuring the behavior of that element. Right? It's saying that the unique identifier for this particular tag is first name field. Right? I am uniquely identifying this element. I'm giving it an ID, not a name, because you can also give it a name, right? And those are different. Right? IDs, by definition, have to be unique, unique within the page, within the screen that you're looking at, right? So there should be only one first name field, right, in this entire document. Yes, right. And you can also give it a name, which is not shown here, but I could absolutely say name, right, equals something something something. That doesn't have to be unique, right? I could use the same name multiple times. Okay. I also have another attribute called value, and it's saying that the value is Alice. Okay. Also notice that the syntax of attributes will always be, some identifier equal and then quoted, right? The value is quoted. Now quotes could be double quote or single quotes, as long as you are consistent, right? You can either always use single quotes or always use double quotes, and you can embed one inside the other. Like you have double quotes that contain single quotes inside, or vice versa, single quotes that contain double quotes inside. That's fine. But usually we use double quotes. That's the most common thing, double quotes. Also notice that here there is a relationship between these two elements or these two tags. If you notice, the ID of the input field is the same as the for of the other. See that? That's going to be in a quiz question somewhere. Okay, this for of the label matches the ID of an input field. Okay, not the name, not the value, but the ID, right? And so that this creates a relationship between these two fields, right? These two fields. So the relationship is as follows. So here's our input field. And when you hover and you put your mouse inside of the input field and you click, right? Usually the input field will have some kind of you highlight it, right? Maybe you'll put some border around, showing you that it is the current field that you're typing in. Yes, right? Maybe some highlight around it, and then you can start typing and you can type and whatnot. Okay. Now the label is just plain text. It just renders like any other text. You can almost see no difference between you just using no label tag or putting a label tag, right? It says, well, what's the difference? Why would I want to put a label, right? And the reason is that this particular tag, what it does is that it makes a relationship between this text and that field, right? And the relationship is that if you click on the first name, it will select that input field, right? So here, if I want to type in Wonderland, I have to, with my mouse, just click anywhere in this box, yes? But if I put a label, I can also click the text. If I click on the text, the mouse is as if I would have clicked on the input field. So what's the point? Why? Who cares? So in big desktop web pages, it might not be an issue. It might not be relevant, right? But in smaller screens like phones or tablets and whatnot, where the text might be smaller, right? And you're like poking at the user interface, right? The bigger you can create the clickable area, okay, for the phone, the better experience you'll have, right? If you're forcing me to click on a small target, it'll just be you'll have a worse experience. Now, obviously, input field is not such a big deal, but it starts to get interesting when you have, for instance, a checkbox or a radio button, where those are pretty small, right, to click on, right? So if you have some big text, right, that I can click, you point my meat cursors, pointy things, right? It'll be a much better experience than to force me to click on something so small. Make sense? So that's what label does. Label allows you to relate two fields, right? And say that if you click on this text, I will select and focus on that input field. Make sense? Yes. Well, it allows you to not necessarily have them next to each other, but yes, the only behavior is that if you click on one, it'll focus on the other, right? But it allows you to separate them. I could put the input field over here and the label way over there, right? So that if you interact with one, right, it'll interact with the other. So other fields are, for instance, date pickers. Okay, and so the input field all by itself, right, like this, right, all by itself with an ID and a value, all by itself, it renders the default text input field. Yes. But you can keep configuring it. You can say, oh, you can also put in an optional type. Right? And you can say, oh, the type is date. Right. And now you are strongly typing the data. You're saying, I'm not accepting any text, right? Only a specific type of text, right? That is only formatted in a specific way, right? So dates, you have to provide me a month, a day, and a year, right? With some slashes or dashes or some way that I can read it as a date. Make sense, right? So, and it also has the benefit that browsers and phones and tablets support these input fields, right? So that if you either you on a desktop, if you click on this, it will pop up some native date picker, right? Or if you're on a phone, if you're on Android, it would pop up Android's date picker, or if you're on iPhone or iOS, it will select iOS's date picker, right? So that is definitely a much better experience than asking me to input just generic text. Yes, right. It makes it harder for me to make a mistake. Okay, that provide the wrong the wrong format, day or month and day, right? Or I forgot the zero in front of the number, or whatever. Yes, so you should always make an effort to minimize the user's possibility of making a mistake. Right. So don't be lazy and just put all your input fields as just plain text. Okay, and just assuming the user will correctly input the date, right? The month of the year, whatnot. Just make it harder for the user to make a mistake. Right. So do use strongly typed fields. Right. Another thing that we kind of overlooked is the value. See value, just like this value over here. This value, it allows you to configure the default value of the field, right? Here we're saying that the default value of this text field is Alice, and it displays Alice, right? If I hadn't had here a value, so input fields don't need IDs, don't need values whatsoever. You could be just inputs, right? So it will render, it would be empty, yes, it would have no value, but you can certainly put in some initial value. You can leave it empty as well, just no value whatsoever. It would be just empty. It would just show the cursor, empty cursor, right? Or you can provide it an initial value. Here we're providing the initial value of the date. Okay. Now this date picker also has the benefit that it is locale sensitive, right? So if you're in Europe, it'll be what is it? Day, month, and year, right? If you're in China or India or wherever you are in any different regions of the world, it'll display the correct date picker, right, for that particular region, right? So it knows what the format should be, right? Now, so that's great, right? You don't have to code that in. That's for free. The other thing here that even though this date picker will be based on the region, okay, the default value always has to have this specific format, regardless of the region. Okay, this will always be year dash month dash day. Again, year dash month dash day, right? And certainly will be in some quiz, asking you, provide blah blah blah, some date picker that has an initial value of November something something. Okay, so yeah. But this might render differently, right? 11, 20. So notice that this is rendering month, day, year, right? In Europe, it would probably render 22/11/2011, right? And if you're in China, differently, and if it's in India, it might be rendered differently. But this is standard. It's always year, month, day, right? With dashes. Then you have dropdowns. Dropdowns allow you to select from any number of initial stipulated values, such as selecting the role, right? Of a user, faculty, student, admin. So this is the select element allows you to draw this drop down, and it has as children, it has the option elements, option, and so an option contains the actual text that gets rendered in the drop down. See that? Okay. Now, so a few things here. Notice that the select has name. See that? Name equal role. Right? And we didn't use names in the other input fields, right? But we should have, right? All input fields should have a name. Okay, they should all have a name. And notice the options. The options have values. Value equal admin, value equal student, value equal faculty. Okay. So those values, when you submit, right, or to a server, after somebody fill out a form and they click submit, I'm ready to send it over to the server. What the browser tends to do is to parse the form that you have that you're submitting, right? It'll create a data object, right, that contains all the data that you've submitted, that you have collected, yes, you filled in. And one of the things it'll do is that it'll create a data structure that has name value pairs, name value, name value, name value, name value. Yes, right. In particular, here we'll say that the name role has the value of whatever you actually selected. Right. It'll be something like, if you selected student, then role will equal student. This value, caps all students, whatever you have in these value attributes. Yes. Okay. Now, if you would have left out the value, from the point of view of the user interface, it would look identical. It would not change. But when you submit, the role would take the value of the text that you selected. Okay, as opposed to the value. All right. So if you provide the value, it'll take that value that you selected. Right. But if you don't provide the value, it'll be whatever text you have in here. Right. So one might say, well, why don't we just use one or the other? Right? I mean, I always need the text because I need to show something to the user. Yes. Why bother with the value? We could just keep this, right? So the difference here, which is, yes. No. The other teacher might have, maybe the other instructor. I think it was Monday. There was an issue that the instructor reported, but I don't know what it was. Sorry. What was I? What was I saying? Oh, yes, thank you. Oh, why have both or not just one of them? Is that what I'm saying? Yeah. So this text here is mostly used for human consumption, right? It's whatever text gets rendered as options. Yes. And it could be really anything. It's meant to be consumed by humans. So I might, for instance, say admin parentheses allows additional capabilities that are not available to faculty and students, right? Right, and that would be something useful for a human being when they select a drop down, right? And they look at admin, and there's some context here of what it means. Yes, it's useful for humans. It would not be useful, if I select that and I send that to the server as part of some data that you selected. Yes, right? Because the text was meant for human consumption, not for computers. When I submit it to a server as data. So a good practice is to always have this value, right? And then this would be some token, some agreed upon token of some data structure that we might, however we consume it, in some algorithm in the server where we're going to take all that data and maybe insert it in some database. Yes, right. So these might be all caps tokens from some dictionary that we have a very well thought out dictionary, right? typically all caps. Faculty, student, and admin probably means something like a foreign key in some table in a database. Make sense? Right? It's meant to be consumed by some algorithm. Make sense? Right? So yeah, so we would provide a value here of what is actually being sent over to the server as a data structure. All right, so buttons and radios. Yeah, so button is an element used for initializing some kind of action, right? That I am submitting something, I'm deleting, I'm adding, I am asking the application to do something for me. There are some default types of buttons, right? There's just a plain old button, and there is a submit button. Okay, so the buttons render as you would expect, right? Just a rectangular button with the text, and the text is configured as the body instead of the button, right? And then you have type telling it what is it? Is it submit, a button, I think it's a clear button as well. And they're meant to be used inside of a form. Okay? Now the submit button does what you think it does. It initializes the action of parsing the data that you have, whatever you filled out in the form, collecting all that, and actually sending it out to the server, right? We're not going to do that. That's the default behavior, right? In forms, in HTML forms, right? That browsers do that. Browsers parse all the data you've selected. It verifies some of it, right? It generates the data structure and then sends it over to wherever you tell it to send it, right? We're not going to do that. We're going to override that behavior, and we're going to handle it ourselves using JavaScript. Right? We want to validate it ourselves. I don't want the browser to do it for me. We're going to validate it, right? Using our own functions, our own validations, our own whatever. We're going to massage the data, make sure it's the correct format, and then we're going to send it out to the server. So we're never going to use type equals submit, right? In any case, we'll use buttons type button, meaning this is a plain button. The event, I will handle the event. I will tell you what to do when you click on that button. Yeah, okay. Now there are other types of buttons. They are checkboxes and radio buttons, and to generate those, you don't actually use the button tag. you go back to the input tag, right? The input tag by saying that the type is radio or the type is checkbox. It renders them as radio or checkbox buttons, right? These are still considered buttons, but we don't use the button tag to render them. We use the input type radio or input type checkbox. Okay, and they are used for selecting data that is either mutually exclusive or mutually inclusive, right? So for the radio buttons, let's look at radio buttons first. Okay. So radio buttons are meant for selecting information or options that are mutually exclusive, meaning that out of all the options, you can only select one, right? If you select any of the other, it will unselect all the other ones, right? So if you have 4 options and you click one, it unselects all the other ones. If you select the other one, it unselects all the other 3. Make sense? That's the expected behavior. Yes. So the names are used for creating the data structure that gets sent out to the server, right? And that data structure would be whatever name you choose here equal whatever value they get, right? So it parses all the names and all the values that you selected, and it creates this data structure for you to send it to the server. IDs are ignored by the form, right? The only the use for IDs is to, for instance, associated with a label, right? Or to uniquely identify them from CSS if you want to change its color or behavior, or from JavaScript, you want to grab it by its ID and do some logic around it. But for forms, IDs are irrelevant. Again, only if you want to associate it with a label, for instance, if you want to click it, right, and make it more clickable. But for forms and create the data structure, it's all name everywhere. Okay. But yeah, IDs would be a great thing to put in here as well, but not for the form anyway. So radio buttons are for mutually exclusive, whereas checkboxes are mutually inclusive, right? Where you have multiple options, and I want to be able to select more than one, right? 2, 3, 4. What are your favorite colors? Well, I don't just have one favorite color; I have many, right? Or maybe movie genres, right? I might like several movie genres. I might select multiple. Yes. Yes.
Are these specific radio buttons like tied to each other by their names?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Good question. So radio buttons by default, if you don't provide the names, all radio buttons can be selected, and they're not aware of each other, right? You say, well, didn't you say they were mutually exclusive? And no, by default, if you don't provide any names, they are completely unaware of each other. So you can select multiple radio buttons, right? The only way that a radio button knows that it should be mutually exclusive with some other radio button is if you configure them with the same name. Okay, remember that I said that IDs are unique identifiers, but names are not, right? IDs have to be unique, right, within the page, but names, no. Names, you could use the same name over and over, right? And one of the important uses of using the same name is to group together several radio buttons and group them together, right? So for instance, you might have a group of radio buttons that say, what is your favorite genre, right? And what's your favorite social network? And what's your favorite whatever, right? And to make them mutually exclusive within that group, okay, one might have the same name, social network. They'll have the same name, yes? And because they have the same name, clicking one will unselect all the other radio buttons in the same name, right? If you select another one, it'll unselect the other ones in the same name. But I can choose a different group, yes, of my favorite colors, and they will be mutually exclusive within that group. And I could use the name, say, favorite color. That would be the name. If it's the same name, they're mutually exclusive within that group. Make sense? Same thing with checkboxes. You can create groups, group them together with the names. Excellent question. Anchors. So anchors is an element that allows you to navigate, right, to reference other documents. Okay, and so reference, you might end up in the home screen, and from the home screen you might want to be able to navigate elsewhere, right? From go to the about screen, or my profile screen, or my login, or my register screen, right? Each screen might be implemented in different HTML documents. Okay, and the way you navigate them is to create anchors, right, or hypertext, right? So the way it works is that you have the text that you want folks to be able to click on, and then you wrap them with an opening anchor tag, right, and then the closing anchor tag. Okay? And then href is what configures what happens when you click on that text, right? You can either navigate to some other URL, right? So that's the location, right, of where you want to go. If you click on Wikipedia, it will dump the current HTML document that you're reading, and then the browser will replace the content with that other document, which is going to go fetch, right? So here it will throw away the document that you're in currently, right? It'll replace it with wikipedia.org, right? Or so that's going off to a page that you don't control. You're going out to some other website. Whereas this one, notice that it just has the name of the file. So this is interpreted as a document that lives in your folder, in the same folder where this document lives, right? And just going to replace it profile.html. Okay. And this one allows you to just navigate to your email client. It'll open up an email client, right? So you can, and it'll create the destination email. It'll populate it, or a phone, which is pretty cool, right? That you can have buttons that you can click on, and this obviously will work on a phone or a tablet or something that has network access to a phone, right? To a phone line, and it will pop up, and the phone will ask you, do you really want to call this? You say yes, right? And it'll call that function. So that's pretty cool. Okay. Table of contents. You can also use hyperlinks, right? To be able to jump around, not only to documents outside of your document, but different sections within the same document, right? So for instance, you can create like a table of content at the top, right? And then you have multiple sections down below, right? And as you click on the table of content, right, it navigates and jumps down to further up and down, right? And the way you do that is by giving the different sections, right, their unique identifiers with a hash, right? And then you can have hyperlinks that have the same hash. The same hash allows you to jump around in the same document. Okay. So well, Angular, React, Vue.js, right? They hijacked this behavior that has been around for quite a while, and they built on top an entire framework called single page applications, right? So when we get to React.js, we'll introduce single page applications. It's a very, very powerful, very modern technique that it's taken web development by storm, but it's built on a technology that has been around for since the beginning in the late 80s, early 90s, right? But they hijacked this behavior to build some really, really interesting things. Are we out of time? All right, awesome. Thank you, everybody, and have a great weekend. We'll talk about the next assignments next week, so you can get started on A2. I will still have my online web dev on Monday at 6 p.m. That's the graduate folks. You're welcome to come. Right, I believe I have links to the Zoom to all the sections if you want to come, but there's no class on Monday, regular class. Okay, but you're welcome to come if you want to have some more pain. Thank you.
Try not to